Hi, this is Rabbi Tzvi Mandel of Congregation of Kalbnei Israel, community of Jewish friends, and I want to thank those who left me compliments. Feels good. I know I'm doing the right thing, and though we do everything for Hashem's sake, but it's good to have friends, right? Ahavas Yisrael, Ahavas HaTorah, and Ahavas Hashem, the three loves that Hashem gave us, and that the Baal Shem Tov stresses so much. Love of Jews between themselves, love of Torah, love of Hashem. And all three are interwound within each other. Okay, without further ado, we'll do the Kitzer-Laws, chapter 112. And first we'll do the Rabbi Togers. I think this is more like straight and in English, and then we'll review it in English with the Oswell one with Rav Feinstein and Mishnah Brewer, and then we'll go to the Rav Shulchan, and then we'll go to Sharm Tzana Bahalacha, Rabbi Braun. And tonight's subject will be products containing chametz that may not be kept on Pesach and those that may be kept. Paragraph 1. Any food that contains a mixture of chametz is forbidden. Furthermore, even if the chametz itself is no longer present, in other words, has been removed and merely its taste remains, the food may not be kept on Pesach. Our obligation to destroy all chametz applies to it as well. In contrast, food that does not contain any chametz at all but was cooked in a chametz utensil, even the utensil that has been used for chametz that day, which is called a keli ben yomo, or was pickled in a chametz utensil, may be left over Pesach. Needless to say, it is forbidden to be eaten. There is, however, no obligation to destroy it. This leniency applies when the food was cooked or pickled in the chametz utensil before Passover, before Pesach. If, however, it was cooked or pickled in the chametz utensil on Pesach, yes, it must be destroyed. Paragraph 2. It is forbidden to keep grain that has kernels that have begun to sprout or that have cracked open. This applies even when the percentage of such kernels is small. Similarly, it is forbidden to keep grain that water spilled over or that was washed in water. Similarly, any flour or other products made from this grain may not be kept over Pesach. Accordingly, when a person sells grain that has become wet to a colleague, he must inform him of the status of the grain so that he will not keep it over Pesach. Similarly, it is forbidden to sell such grain to a Gentile, to a non-Jew, in a situation where there is reason to suspect that the Gentile will sell it back to another Jew who will keep it in his possession over Pesach. Number 3, clothes that have been starched with starch made from wheat may be worn on Pesach. They should not, however, be placed on a table if they contain actual pieces of chametz that might crumble. Needless to say, it is forbidden to use such clothing to hold flour to be used for Pesach in. 4. In previous generations, flour was mixed with other substances to produce homemade glue. It is permitted to attach paper to windows using such glue, provided the chametz is not visible. Since the glue is not actual chametz and it is covered, the rabbis were not stringent concerning this. It's not actual chametz and it's covered. 2 reasons for leniency. If, however, the glue is visible from the outside, it is forbidden. If the papers were attached, more than 30 days before Pesach, it is permitted in all instances, even when it's visible. Number 5, it's permitted to write on the Chalamoid Pesach using ink that was prepared from beer before Pesach, because the beer had become unfit for a dog's consumption before Pesach, and we use this measurement to find out whether something is Pesach or not, whether it's roy la'achilas kelev, whether a dog would be able to consume this. Similarly, in all circumstances where chametz becomes totally spoiled from Pesach, it may be kept and one may benefit from it on Pesach itself. In contrast, if a non-Jew prepared ink on Pesach using beer, a Jew is forbidden to benefit from it, because a Jew is forbidden to benefit from the chametz of a non-Jew on Pesach. One more to go. Number 6, all utensils that we did not kasher before Pesach should be scrubbed clean on the 14th of Nisan before the 6th hour, so that they contain no obvious chametz, and put in a place that is not frequented. In other words, that one will not enter on Pesach. It is preferable to lock them in a special room and hide the key until after Pesach. Let's go to the same thing in English, 112, chapter 112, but with the commentaries of Rav Feinstein and Mishnah Berurah. 112. Chapter 112. Okay, here the format is different. Chapter 112, Simon 112, which chametz is prohibited to keep in one's possession on Pesach, and which is permitted to be kept, containing 6 paragraphs. The first paragraph will speak about mixtures containing a chametz component. The second one, the chametz kernels mixed with other grain. The third speaks about starched fabrics. The fourth speaks about pasting paper on windows. Number 5 is ink cooked with beer. And number 6 is utensils of chametz. The introduction to this, to chapter 112. As we have seen in the introduction to the previous chapter, it is prohibited to keep chametz in one's possession on Pesach. This chapter discusses the extent of this prohibition of keeping chametz in your possession. Kitzer focuses here on examples that were prevalent in his time. Nowadays, with the proliferation of manufactured products, many seemingly innocuous ins may contain chametz ingredients. That word was innocuous, innocuous. In order to properly observe the laws of Pesach, it is essential to obtain competent rabbinic guidance with regard to the kosher for Pesach status of any products whose components cannot be absolutely determined. What we're going to learn is the generalities, the general rules, and you have to take it from there. If you really have a question, then you have to ask a person that knows these things. Okay, paragraph 1. Any item that is fit for consumption that contains a component of chametz, even if it contains no actual chametz, but merely the flavor of chametz. For example, if the chametz that was cooked in a mixture was removed, nevertheless, it is forbidden to keep it in one's possession on Pesach. See the bottom. The concern that the mixture contains flavor of the chametz exists whenever the non-chametz component was less than 60 times the volume of the chametz that was removed. See Mishnah Berurah 442.1. Under normal circumstances, if a mixture contains 60 times the volume of a prohibited food, it may be presumed that no flavor of the prohibited food is present, because it's 60 times more. Thus, if we are aware of a mixture that contains less than 1/60th of chametz before Pesach, under the principle of bittul, nullification, one may even eat it on Pesach. See below 117. We'll learn about this in paragraph 117 if we learn that paragraph. On Pesach, however, the laws of bittul are more stringent and chametz is not nullified when it is present, even in the smallest amount. There's no amount that's permitted. Now, it goes without saying that the halachas present in this paragraph are merely intended to give a basic familiarity, like we said, with the general guidelines pertaining to these laws. Even an accomplished scholar must go through extensive study and training before being able to rule with regard to these halachas. Therefore, any questions on these matters should be presented to a competent halachic authority. Okay. Nevertheless, it is forbidden to keep it in one's possession on Pesach, whether the prohibition of keeping such a mixture in one's possession on Pesach is biblical or rabbinical in nature is a matter of dispute. See Mishnah Berurah 442.1 for discussion. Eating is definitely biblical. Also, it's prohibited to benefit from such food as well. Okay, we'll go further. But an item that did not contain any chametz at all, but was merely cooked in a chametz utensil, even if the utensil was ben yaimai, literally of that day, meaning it was used for cooking chametz within the 24 hours prior to the time when this food was cooked in it, or if the food in question was soaked for 24 hours in a chametz utensil, it may be kept in one's possession on Pesach, even if the volume of the food is not 60 times the volume of the walls of the pot. One must be careful that the food should not remain soaking in the chametz utensil during Pesach, which we'll see later in the Kitzer. If before Pesach food was cooked or remained cooked, soaking for 24 hours in a chametz utensil that was not a ben yaimai, the food may even be eaten on Pesach. Okay. We'll go further. This, however, applies only if it was cooked or soaked in the chametz utensil before Pesach. But if it was cooked or soaked on chametz on Pesach in the chametz utensil, one is obligated to destroy it, even if it was not a ben yomah. As mentioned earlier, the laws of bittul on Pesach itself are more stringent. If the amount of permissible food was 60 times the volume of the utensil, excuse me. If the amount of permissible food was 60 times the volume of the utensil, example given, a chametz ladle was placed into a hot pot containing 60 times its volume, a competent halachic authority should be consulted. Okay, we'll go further. Number 2, grain that contains kernels that are sprouting or split open, which are chametz, even if a small amount of sprouting or split open kernels are mixed into a large amount of non-chametz grain, and similarly grain upon which water fell or that was washed in water, is prohibited to be kept in one's possession during Pesach. So too, all things that were produced from this grain, one is prohibited to keep in his possession during Pesach. Therefore, one who sells to his fellow grain that has gotten wet must inform him that it has gotten wet, so that he does not keep it in his possession on Pesach. It is even prohibited to sell it to a non-Jew, where there is reason for concern that the non-Jew will sell it to another Jew, who will unwittingly keep it in his possession for Pesach. According to Mishnah Berurah 467.1, in a case where the kernels that have become chametz are noticeable, there is basis to rule leniently in a case of need, and one would be allowed to sell them to a non-Jew before Pesach. However, one should consult the halachic authority. Okay. Number 3, paragraph 3, fabrics that were laundered and were treated with the fat of wheat, in other words, wheat starch, may be worn on Pesach. They may be worn on Pesach, even if they were treated close to Pesach, and even if there is some substance of starch on them. This is nevertheless permitted, since the chametz is no longer in its original edible state. Shabura 442.3. Okay. Now, speaking about this wheat, if they have some substance of starch on them, due to the concern that a crumb may crumble from them and enter the food, and it is certainly prohibited to put the Pesach flour that is used for baking the matzahs into a bag made of such clothes. So therefore, we skipped a line. We'll start this again. However, they should not be spread on the table as a tablecloth. If they have some substance of starch on them, due to the concern that a crumb may crumble from them and enter the food, and it is certainly prohibited to put the Pesach flour that is used for baking the matzahs into a bag made of such cloth. Excuse me. Paragraph 4. In earlier times, paper was pasted onto the window of homes for the purpose of privacy, to keep out sunlight, using paste made of flour and water. This paragraph addresses whether this presents a concern for Pesach. It is permissible to paste paper on the wall even within 30 days of Pesach, provided that there is no visible chametz. For since the paste is not actual chametz, paste is not considered actual chametz, rather it is what is known as chametz nuksha, defective chametz, which is not subject to the biblical prohibition of chametz, but it is prohibited rabbinically. See Mishnah Berurah 442.2, who defines chametz nuksha as something that did not become totally chametz, or something that is only marginally fit for eating. Okay. And it is also covered, so there's two leniencies here. First of all, it's covered, and second of all, there's no visible chametz. Therefore, the sages were not stringent in its regard. But if the paste is visible from the outside, it is prohibited. But if this is being done more than 30 days before Pesach, it is permitted under all circumstances. Chametz that is unfit for consumption, even by dogs, is not subject to the prohibition of keeping chametz in one's possession. If the papers were pasted on more than 30 days before Pesach, by the time Pesach arrives, the paste has certainly hardened and spoiled to the extent that it's no longer fit for canine consumption. Food for a dog, I guess. If the entire amount of chametz used was less than a kazayas, which is between 0.6-1.1 fluid ounces, it need not be disposed. disposed of, even if the pasting was done within 30 days before Pesach. That's Mishnah Berurah 442:17. We will continue. Paragraph 5. In earlier times, some inks were made by cooking the various ingredients such as gallnuts, ferrous sulfate, and or copper sulfate in beer produced from barley and thus chametz. So the Kitzer says ink that was cooked with beer before Pesach may be used for writing during Chol HaMoed, Pesach, the intermediate days of Pesach. This is because it has become unfit even for canine consumption prior to Pesach. This, however, is true only if the chametz was totally unfit for canine consumption before Pesach. If the chametz was fit for canine consumption when Pesach began, it became prohibited at that time and must be destroyed, even if it is later unfit. Okay, 12 and 13. Let's see this on the bottom. When we say ink was cooked with beer before Pesach, that is before the end of the 5th hour when chametz must be removed from one's possession, which we'll learn about further on. The first 2 days and final 2 days of Pesach, and Yisrael, the first and final days, are Yantach, when writing is totally prohibited. The laws of Chol HaMoed, the intermediate days, have been discussed before in 104, when writing is permissible on Chol HaMoed. Okay. That was 13. Now, in all similar cases where the chametz has become totally unfit for canine consumption before Pesach, one is permitted to have benefit from it and to keep it in his possession on Pesach itself. One may therefore use a topical ointment containing grain alcohol on Pesach, even for a condition that is not life-threatening, provided that it became unfit for canine consumption before Pesach. This is by Rav Feinstein and Niglas Moshe, Arachaim 3:62. But if a non-Jew cooked ink with beer on Pesach, it is prohibited for a Jew to benefit from it. For the chametz of a non-Jew is also prohibited for benefit to a Jew on Pesach. Thus, its status as well as determined at the onset of Pesach. Since it was fit for canine consumption at the time, it remains prohibited, even though it later becomes unfit for canine consumption. One more to go. Paragraph 6, regarding all utensils that one is not koshering on Pesach, the laws of koshering, we'll see further on in 116. So, regarding all utensils that one is not koshering on Pesach, for Pesach, one must scrub them thoroughly on or before Erev Pesach, before the 6th hour. If he did not wash them out before Pesach, he should do so whenever he remembers, even during Pesach or after Pesach. See Mishnah Berurah 451:6. And wash them out to the extent that there is no visible chametz on them. One who sells all his chametz to a non-Jew through one's rabbi, as is customary nowadays, should clarify with his rabbi whether there's any need to clean his utensils. One should then put them away in an out-of-way place where one does not normally go on Pesach. It is preferable to lock them up in a separate room and put the key away until after Pesach, so that if one forgets and tries to enter the room, he will remember that it is Pesach by the time he unearths the key. Mishnah Berurah 451:8. We'll stop this here now. Let's just look at the Rav adds anything in 113. 13. Huh? Right. Okay. Let's see if Rabbi Braun in his Sharmas Yom Balacha has something that would be relevant. Toothpaste, he brings down from the Mesudah Stavra on the Kitzer-Laws in 117, Kuf Yud Zayin. Toothpaste that has taruvas chametz, either actual chametz or things that are mixed chametz within it, mixed in within it, should not be used on Pesach. One may believe a doctor that tells him that there's no suspicion of chametz in some kind of a chemical that he may have given him. The doctor is believed because it's something that one can do research himself, or eventually it'll be found out about. So we trust that he's saying the truth. This is from Levushe Modchen, his response in 86 Arachaim. Especially if it's written on the bottle and the ingredients, then you know what's in there. We can trust that. Steichemen quotes one great person, that to smoke cigarettes which the paper around the cigarette was glued on, which has chametz on it, which is what we learned about. So he says it's permitted to smoke these cigarettes. Others also hold that since it's already impossible for even a dog to get food from this, and it's also not actually visible, so they take on that it's permitted. Question is if you're allowed to smoke to begin with, but that's So here's an interesting situation. You know, tabak is something that people smell. I don't know how to describe it. They have it in the shuls a lot of times. The person goes around with it during davening or maybe during the reading of the Torah. So the Holy Devei Chaim in his first volume, Yeridayas and Chav, and the Chuvas Maria Assad and Kufnan and the Maram Shik all say, or they found like there's like whiskey or something that's in it to give it a better smell or something, that you may smell it on Pesach. However, the Maram Shik in Reish Mem Beis goes at length to prove that even though it might be permitted according to the halacha, the straight halacha, but whoever is stringent about it, Tavi ala bracha, will be blessed. We'll stop here meanwhile. Have a good night.